In the courtroom, my dad looked proud. The 3 vacation homes in the Florida Keys are ours. My mom smiled. She doesn't deserve a cent. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I just watched. The judge opened the sealed letter I had placed on the bench. He scanned it, paused, then laughed hard. It was a dry, sharp sound that echoed in the silence. He looked up and said quietly, "Well, this is interesting." The color drained from their faces. They thought this was a victory. They didn't know it was an audit. Drop a comment telling me, "Have you ever seen karma hit someone instantly? Where are you watching from tonight?" To understand why my parents looked so terrified in that moment, you have to go back 6 months. Back to when the Silver Creek vineyard wasn't a prize to be fought over, but a dying patient on life support. The blight had started on the lower slopes, a fungal infection that turned vibrant green leaves into brittle, brown skeletons. It moved fast, faster than I had ever seen, mirroring the decline of the woman who built this place. My grandmother, Eleanor. I was the only one there. My name is Paige, and for the last decade, I haven't just been Eleanor's granddaughter, I have been the steward of this land. While my friends were moving to the city, chasing corporate jobs and happy hours, I was here, knee-deep in soil amendments at 4 in the morning. My parents, James and Cynthia, they were busy. That was always the word. Busy in San Francisco, busy with galas, busy maintaining an image that required them to be anywhere but here. They called once a month, not to ask about Eleanor's chemo or the blight, but to ask about market values. "How is the vintage looking?" James would ask, his voice tinny over the speakerphone. "Vintage yields are down, Dad," I would say, wiping sweat and dirt from my forehead. "We need to invest in better irrigation." He would sigh, impatient. "Just keep it running, Paige. It is an asset. Treat it like one. An asset." To me, these vines were living things. To them, they were just numbers on a spreadsheet they hoped would stay black. People always ask me why I stayed. Why I let them treat me like an unpaid farmhand while they lived off the trust fund Eleanor had set up years ago. Why I didn't just pack my bags and leave them to deal with the rot themselves. The truth isn't simple. It wasn't weakness. It was an invisible chain. You see, when you love something deeply, a person, a place, that love becomes a binding contract. I wasn't staying for my parents. I was staying because I made a promise to Eleanor when I was 12 years old, watching her graft a new vine with hands that were already starting to shake. She told me, "We don't own this land, Paige. We just borrow it from the future." My parents weaponized that promise. They knew I wouldn't let the vineyard die, just like they knew I wouldn't let Eleanor die alone. They counted on my conscience to cover for their lack of one. It is a specific kind of trap, being the responsible one. You become the load-bearing wall. If you leave, the whole house comes down. And for a long time, I was terrified of the wreckage. So I stayed. I worked 18-hour days. I managed the harvest, the fermentation, the bottling, and the hospice care, all while James and Cynthia posted photos of charity dinners where they pledged money they didn't have. I was the invisible engine keeping their lifestyle afloat, the silent partner in a business they claimed to own but couldn't even navigate. But silence has a shelf life. And mine was about to expire. Eleanor passed on a Tuesday. The silence in the main house was heavier than I expected. The hum of the oxygen machine was gone, replaced by the sound of the wind rattling the old window panes. I sat by her bed for an hour, just holding her hand, before I finally picked up the phone to call my father. He didn't ask if she was in pain. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked, "Did she sign the papers?" They arrived the next morning. Not in black, not in mourning, but in a rented luxury SUV that gleamed offensively against the dusty backdrop of the vineyard. James wore a suit that looked too tight, and Cynthia was in a cream-colored dress that belonged at a garden party, not a wake. They didn't go to see Eleanor's body. They went straight to the living room, where they began tagging furniture with little colored stickers. "This credenza is vintage," Cynthia muttered, slapping a red on it. "We can auction it in the city." I stood in the doorway, still wearing my work boots, smelling like earth and exhaustion. "She is not even buried yet," I said, my voice rough. James turned, holding a folder. He didn't look sad. He looked manic. "We have to be practical, Paige. Funerals are expensive. Estates are complicated. We need to liquidate to stay liquid." He thrust the folder at me. Inside was a document titled Quitclaim Deed. It transferred full ownership of the Silver Creek estate to a holding company I recognized as a front for a major developer. The signature at the bottom was Eleanor's, or at least a shaky approximation of it. "She signed this 3 weeks ago," James said, his eyes not meeting mine. "She knew it was time. The upkeep is too much." This developer wants to build luxury condos. They are offering $5.2 million cash. She would never sell, I said, looking at the date. March 15th. She made me promise to keep this land agricultural. She was confused at the end. Cynthia chimed in, not looking up from a silver tea set she was appraising. She told us she was worried about you, Paige. She said you were becoming obsessive. Controlling. The air left the room. Controlling? I was the one changing her sheets. I was the one feeding her. See, James said, pointing a finger at me. You are hysterical. This is exactly why she wanted us to handle it. You are too emotional to make business decisions. Then came the whisper campaign. It started that afternoon. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles, and I heard Cynthia in the kitchen, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial hush. Poor Paige, she was saying. The stress of the caretaking. It broke her a little. We are selling the farm to pay for her treatment. She needs a facility. They weren't just stealing the land. They were stealing my credibility. They were painting me as the unstable daughter who needed to be managed, invalidating any objection I might raise before I even raised it. It was a preemptive strike. I looked at the deed again. March 15th. I knew that date. I closed the folder. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just walked out of the room, leaving them to their stickers and their lies. My parents moved into the main house like an occupying army. They took over the master suite, forcing me into the small guest cottage by the equipment shed. They treated me like the help, asking me to fetch coffee or move boxes while they sat on the veranda, drinking the vintage wine I had bottled by hand 3 years ago. This is a bit tannic, James complained, swirling the glass. Maybe the developers are right to pave it. I kept my head down. I didn't argue. I didn't defend the grapes. I needed proof. I knew the deed was a lie, but I needed to know why they were so desperate. Why sell now? Why the rush? $5 million was a lot of money, but the vineyard generated steady income. Selling it was killing the golden goose. Unless you needed to eat the goose to survive the night. The answer came 2 days later. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when James left his briefcase open on the table to take a call outside. He was shouting at someone, his voice cracking in a way that didn't sound like a negotiation. It sounded like begging. I dried my hands and walked over. Inside wasn't just the deed. It was a stack of urgent notices. Foreclosure warnings on their San Francisco condo. Maxed out credit card statements. A letter from a private club revoking their membership for non-payment. And a lawsuit from a former business partner accusing James of embezzlement. It hit me all at once. The realization wasn't hot and angry. It was cold and clarifying. For years, I had been intimidated by them. I thought they were these titans of industry, these sophisticated socialites who looked down on me because I was just a farmer. I thought their criticism came from a place of superiority. But looking at these papers, I realized it was all a performance. This was the illusion of power of the empty wallet. They weren't powerful elites. They were drowning. They were desperate debtors using arrogance to mask their bankruptcy. The vineyard wasn't a legacy to them. It was a life raft. They didn't hate the land. They just needed to strip mine it to pay for their mistakes. Their cruelty wasn't strength. It was panic. When James walked back in, snapping his phone shut, he looked at me with that familiar sneer. What are you looking at? Nothing, I said, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I looked at him and saw a man terrified of being exposed. Just checking the expiration date. He didn't know I meant his, not the milk's. I went back to the cottage and pulled out my journals. I documented everything. The weather, the harvest yields, the chemical balance of the soil, and Eleanor's health. I turned to March 15th, the day they claimed she signed the deed. My entry was clear: severe storm. Power out. Roads flooded. Eleanor in respiratory distress. Ambulance could not make it up the drive until 6 p.m. I checked the flight logs online. James and Cynthia had posted photos from a gala in New York City on March 15th. They weren't even in the state. They couldn't have been. They had forged a signature on a day when they were 3,000 miles away, drinking champagne while I was keeping their mother alive by candlelight. I had the timeline. I had the motive. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. They had Sterling, the family lawyer, a man whose smile was as oily as his hair. He would bury my journals. He would claim the gala photos were old. He would find a way to twist the truth until it choked me. I needed something undeniable. Something that didn't rely on my word against theirs. I went to Eleanor's library. It was the one room they hadn't touched yet, mostly because it smelled of old paper and they didn't think books had resale value. I sat at her heavy oak desk and opened the bottom drawer. It was locked, but I knew where the key was, taped under the seat of her wheelchair. A place only a caregiver would know. Inside was a single, thick envelope. On the front, in Eleanor's shaky but distinct handwriting, were the words, "To be opened in case of greed." My hands trembled as I picked it up. She knew. She had known all along. She had watched them circling like hawks, and she had prepared a snare. I didn't open it. The seal was wax, stamped with her signet ring. If I broke it, its validity might be questioned in court. I needed someone with authority to open it. But first, I needed to confirm the battlefield. I took the envelope to Sterling's office the next morning. I didn't trust him, but I had to play the game to see where the pieces stood. I walked past his secretary and placed the envelope on his mahogany desk. "Eleanor left this," I said. "It needs to be read before you finalize any sale." Sterling picked it up, weighing it in his hands. He looked at the inscription, then at me. He gave a tight, dismissive smile. "Paige, really? Your grandmother was a dramatic woman toward the end. This is probably just sentimental rambling. We don't need to complicate the sale with emotional outbursts." He moved to put it in his shredder pile. "Don't," I said, my voice sharp. He paused, his hand hovering over the tray. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "Listen to me, you little farm girl. The developers have already cut the check. Your parents get their bailout, I get my commission, and you get to not be sued for elder abuse. Do we have an understanding?" The threat hung in the air. He wasn't just their lawyer. He was their partner. He knew the deed was forged, and he was helping them launder the asset. I snatched the envelope back before he could react. "We understand each other perfectly," I said. I walked out. I didn't go home. I went straight to the county courthouse. I filed a petition to contest the deed, bypassing Sterling entirely, and I made a specific request. In our county, you can request a judicial review for emergency probate issues involving potential fraud. I requested Judge Thompson. My parents didn't know who Judge Thompson was. They thought he was just a name on a docket. But I knew. Eleanor had mentioned him once years ago. He was the only person she played chess with on Sundays. I was setting the board, and they were walking right into checkmate. We were back in the moment where it all started. The courtroom air was stale and recycled, smelling of floor wax and anxiety, but the tension was electric. James and Cynthia stood at the plaintiff's table, radiating a smug confidence that made my stomach turn. Sterling stood beside them, looking bored, checking his expensive watch like this was just another billable hour. They had testified under oath. They had walked right into the trap. James had taken the stand first. He looked the judge in the eye, adjusted his cuff links, and lied with the ease of a man who had been faking his net worth for 30 years. "Yes, Your Honor. My mother signed the deed in my presence on March 15th. She was lucid. She was eager to sell, and I held her hand as she did it. Cynthia had followed, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She wanted us to have the money. She explicitly told us that she knew Paige couldn't handle the estate. She was worried about Paige's mental state. We are doing this for her own good. They painted me as incompetent, greedy, and unstable. They thought they had one because I hadn't objected once. I sat at the defendant's table, hands folded, face blank. My silence wasn't submission. It was the quiet before the artillery barrage. Napoleon said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake." I let them talk until they ran out of breath. Then came my turn. I didn't take the stand. I simply walked to the bench and placed the sealed envelope in front of Judge Thompson. "My grandmother anticipated this," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "She left this for you." Judge Thompson looked at the wax seal. He recognized the ring stamp immediately. His expression softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition between two old chess partners, before hardening into judicial steel. He broke the seal. The sound of the wax cracking was like a gunshot in the quiet room. He pulled out the letter and began to read. Silence stretched tight as a piano wire. James shifted his weight, looking annoyed. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We have a signed deed." "Quiet," Judge Thompson snapped, not looking up. He read to the end. Then he looked at the date on the letter. Then he looked at James. And then he laughed. It was the dry, sharp sound I remembered from the beginning. "Well, this is interesting." He turned the letter around so the court could see. "This letter is dated January 1st. In it, Eleanor explicitly states that she suspects her son will try to sell the estate upon her death." James scoffed. "Paranoia. She was senile. Is that so?" Judge Thompson leaned forward, his eyes locking onto my father. Because this letter contains two very important pieces of information. First, it notes that you were in New York on March 15th, a fact easily verified by the flight logs your daughter submitted into evidence. You just swore under oath you were in California. That is perjury. James opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The color began to drain from his face. But the second point is more significant. The judge continued, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. You see, Mr. Henderson, you couldn't have sold the Silver Creek estate on March 15th. Do you know why? Because she signed it over to me, James stammered. No, Judge Thompson said. Because on January 2nd, Eleanor transferred the entire estate into a blind trust to protect it from predatory relatives. She didn't own the land on March 15th. The trust did. You forged a deed to property your mother didn't even legally hold in her name anymore. Sterling dropped his pen. He knew what that meant. This wasn't just civil fraud. It was a federal crime involving a trust. And do you know who the trustee of that blind trust is? Judge Thompson asked, his voice ringing with finality. He didn't wait for an answer. He tapped his own chest. I am. The silence in the room shattered. My parents weren't just looking at a judge. They were looking at the man they had tried to rob, the man who held the keys to the kingdom, and the man who had just caught them lying to his face. Bailiff, Judge Thompson said, take them into custody. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut is distinct. It is mechanical, final, and completely devoid of emotion. James didn't go quietly. He screamed that I was ungrateful, that I was a thief, that I had ruined the family name. Cynthia just wept, not for the loss of her mother or her daughter, but for the loss of the status she had counterfeited for decades. Sterling tried to slip out the back, but the bailiff was faster. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just watched. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a waste management procedure. I was watching the blight being removed from the crop so the rest of the harvest could survive. When the heavy oak doors closed behind them, Judge Thompson looked down at me from the bench. He didn't say a word. He just nodded once. A silent checkmate. 6 months later, the Silver Creek estate doesn't look like a crime scene. It looks like a garden. The blight is gone, treated with aggressive pruning and healthy soil. The vines are heavy with fruit, deep purple and dusted with the white wax of yeast. But the biggest change isn't in the agriculture. It is in the people. I didn't sell the land. I didn't turn it into a luxury resort. I launched the Eleanor Project. It is a horticultural therapy program for at-risk youth, kids who, like me, were told they were weeds in someone else's garden. They come here to learn that dirt isn't dirty. It is the source of life. They learn that patience pays off, that scars on a vine can heal over to become the strongest part of the wood. Yesterday, I watched a teenage boy named Leo carefully grafting a scion onto a rootstock. He was focused, gentle, treating the plant with a reverence my father never showed a living soul. That is when I understood the final lesson Eleanor was trying to teach me. There is a concept I call the justice of the sower. Most people think justice is about punishment, about the axe, the fire, the prison cell. And sure, seeing my parents face the consequences of their greed was necessary, but that is just clearing the field. That is just pulling the weeds. If you stop there, you just have an empty field. True justice is what you plant in the space they used to occupy. It isn't enough to destroy the bad. You have to cultivate the good. My parents wanted to strip this land for cash. My justice is making it bloom. My revenge isn't that they are sitting in a cell. It is that this vineyard is thriving without them. It is that their absence became the fertilizer for something far more beautiful than their presence ever was. I walked down the rows as the sun dipped below the hills, turning the sky the color of a bruised plum. I touched the old vine, the one Eleanor planted 60 years ago. It is gnarled and thick, a survivor of droughts, floods, and parasites. I am not the invisible daughter anymore. I am not the spare part. I am the root. I am the sower. And the harvest is finally mine. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy, but outgrowing them. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family to save your own peace? Share your story below. I read every single one.